The morning they fired Margaret Doyle, the sky over the quiet Ohio neighborhood was gray, like it already knew something cruel was about to happen. She was standing in the kitchen she had cleaned 1,000 times, holding a cup of tea she had made for a man she loved like family. Harold Bennett, 81 years old. The man she had cared for, fed, bathed, and stayed up with through 11 long years. And now, 2 strangers were standing in that kitchen telling her she was a thief. "We know what you did, Margaret," Vanessa said, arms crossed, her voice sharp as glass. "We've seen the accounts. Money doesn't just disappear." Margaret's hands trembled. The teacup rattled against the saucer. "I never touched his money. Not $1. You can ask Harold. Ask him." But Harold wasn't in the room. They had made sure of that. Daniel, Harold's son, wouldn't even look at her. He stared at the floor, jaw tight, while his wife did the talking. "Pack your things," Vanessa said. "You have 20 minutes. 11 years. Reduced to 20 minutes and a cardboard box. Let me take you back, so you understand who Margaret really was." 11 years earlier, Margaret had answered a simple ad. A widower needed a live-in nurse. His wife had passed, his health was failing, and his only son lived 3 states away and rarely called. When she first met Harold, he was a proud man, pretending he didn't need help. He refused her hand on the stairs. He insisted he could cook. Then he nearly fell, and she caught him, and something between them softened. She wasn't just an employee. Over the years, she became the person who remembered his late wife's birthday, the one who sat with him during thunderstorms, the one who held his hand in cold hospital hallways at 3 a.m. when the tests came back frightening. And she gave things up to do it. She had a man once, a good man named Tom, who wanted to marry her and move to Florida. But Harold's health was fragile that year, and Margaret couldn't leave him. Tom waited. Then Tom stopped waiting. She spent her own savings more than once, quietly covering pharmacy bills when Harold's accounts were being sorted out by the family. She never asked to be paid back. She told herself that's what family does. She didn't know the family would one day call her a criminal. Harold Bennett was a wealthy man, though you'd never know it from how he lived. A modest 2-story house, an old recliner he refused to replace. A garden he loved more than money. He had built a small manufacturing business from nothing, sold it in his 60s, and quietly set aside a comfortable fortune. But money never made him happy. People did. And most of his people were gone, or had left him behind. His son Daniel called maybe twice a year, usually around the holidays, usually when something was needed. Did Daniel call? Harold would ask sometimes, on his birthday, watching the phone. Margaret would gently change the subject and bake his favorite cinnamon cake instead. She watched a lonely man light up only when she walked into the room. And she understood something the family never did. Harold didn't need their money. He needed someone to stay, and she stayed. The daily life of a caregiver is invisible to the world. Margaret woke at 5 a.m. to prepare his medications, lining the little pills in neat rows by the window. She cooked soft meals his stomach could handle. She drove him to appointments, sat in waiting rooms reading the same worn magazines, and learned the names of every nurse on the cardiology floor. At night, when Harold's breathing turned shallow, she slept in the chair beside his bed so she could hear him. Some nights, she didn't sleep at all. The family never saw the sleepless nights. They never saw her crying quietly in the car, after a bad diagnosis, gathering herself before going back inside, with a smile. The trouble started the spring Vanessa came to visit. Daniel's wife had a way of walking into a house and counting everything in it. The silver, the paintings, a deed framed in the hallway. Margaret noticed it immediately, the way her eyes moved like a cash register. "It's just so much house for one old man," Vanessa said one afternoon, sipping coffee, "and so much money sitting around." Within weeks, the visits became frequent. Suddenly Daniel cared. Suddenly there were calls about Dad's finances and planning ahead. Margaret didn't think much of it. She wanted to believe the family was finally showing up. Then she noticed the withdrawals, small at first, then larger, money leaving Harold's accounts in amounts that made her stomach turn. When she gently mentioned it to Harold, he frowned. "I didn't authorize that," he said. "Daniel handles the online banking now, for my eyes," he said. That was the moment the floor began to tilt, because the money was disappearing and the family had just handed themselves the keys. The betrayal didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, the way cold water rises. First, Vanessa suggested Harold shouldn't be bothered by Margaret's questions. Then she began intercepting the mail. Then the family hired their own accountant, who reviewed the statements and announced, with great drama, that nearly $200,000 was missing. And they pointed at the only person who lived in the house, Margaret. It made sense to outsiders. The nurse had access, the nurse handled the errands, the nurse was always there. What outsiders didn't know was that Margaret had no access to the online accounts at all. Daniel had taken that over months earlier to protect his father. But the truth doesn't matter when a family has already decided who the villain is. And the cruelest part, Harold was about to be told a lie that would break his heart. They got to Harold while Margaret was at the pharmacy. When she came home, the air in the house felt different. Harold wouldn't meet her eyes. "Did you take from me, Margaret?" he asked, his voice small and shaking. "They showed me papers." Her heart shattered. "Harold, no, never. You know me." But confusion clouds easily in an exhausted, frightened old mind. They had spent the afternoon filling his head with documents and accusations. And for the first time in 11 years, Harold looked at her with doubt. That look hurt more than the firing that came 3 days later. The breaking point came on that gray morning in the kitchen. Vanessa and Daniel were waiting. They told her to pack. They watched her fold her few belongings into a cardboard box, the same box that once held Harold's new blood pressure monitor. At the door, Margaret turned to Harold, who sat in his recliner, frail and silent. "Harold," she whispered, "whatever they told you, I only ever loved you like my own father." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And Vanessa stepped between them. "That's enough. Goodbye, Margaret." The door closed. 11 years, gone. Margaret sat in her old car in the driveway, gripping the wheel, and finally let herself cry. The kind of crying that comes from the bottom of the soul. But what she didn't know, sitting in that driveway, was that justice was already recording in the corner of Harold's living room. Here is what the family forgot. Years earlier, after a string of news stories about home burglaries, Harold had grown nervous, so he asked a technician to install 2 small cameras, one by the front door, one in the corner of the living room, tucked beside an old clock. He'd half forgotten about them. The footage saved automatically to a little box in the hall closet and to an online account. An account Margaret had helped him set up years ago, under his email, with a password Harold kept written in his Bible. The cameras had seen everything, every visit, every conversation, every hand that reached into that house. And there was someone else who knew about them. Harold's attorney. Ruth Calloway had been Harold's elder law attorney for 20 years, a sharp, careful woman who didn't like surprises and didn't like being lied to. 2 weeks after Margaret was fired, Daniel and Vanessa came to her office. They wanted to update Dad's estate and move quickly. Too quickly. Ruth had seen this before. "Before we change anything," Ruth said calmly, "I'd like to speak with Harold privately, and I'd like to review the account activity." Vanessa's smile tightened. "Is that really necessary?" "It is," Ruth said. "Always." That single sentence was the beginning of the end for their entire scheme. Ruth visited Harold alone. She found a man who seemed smaller than she remembered, anxious, missing something he couldn't name. "Where's Margaret?" Harold asked her quietly. "The house is so empty." Ruth's instincts sharpened. She gently asked him about the missing money, and Harold grew confused. "Daniel handles all that now," he said, "on the computer." Ruth knew Harold had never trusted a computer in his life. Then Harold said something that changed everything. "Check the cameras, Ruth. The ones in the closet box. I want to know if Margaret really did it." Ruth's eyes widened. "Harold," she said slowly, "you have cameras?" They pulled the footage together, Ruth and a technician, in Harold's living room. Months of recordings. And there it was. Vanessa sitting at Harold's desk, logging into the online banking on Daniel's laptop. Daniel beside her, reading account numbers aloud. Footage from weeks before Margaret was ever accused. There was more. A conversation, caught clearly. "Once the nurse is gone," Vanessa's recorded voice said, "we say she took it. He'll believe us. Then we get power of attorney before he figures it out." Harold watched the scream in silence. An old man learning that his own son had robbed him and framed the one person who had loved him. Sigh. A single tear ran down his cheek. "She didn't do it," he whispered. "She never did it." The truth came out fast after that. Ruth pulled the full bank records. The withdrawals traced directly to a new account, one in Vanessa's maiden name. The money hadn't vanished. It had been moved, deliberately, while a loyal nurse was set up to take the blame. Ruth contacted Adult Protective Services and the bank's fraud department. She gathered the footage, the records, and Harold's own statement. Then she made one will call. To Margaret. Margaret was working a night shift at a care facility across town, exhausted, her reputation in tatters. When her phone rang and an unfamiliar voice said, "Miss Doyle, my name is Ruth Calloway. I'm Harold's attorney. I think you should sit down." Margaret's knees nearly gave out. "We know the truth," Ruth said gently. "And Harold knows it too. He wants to see you." The consequences came like a storm the family never saw forming. The fraudulent power of attorney they had pushed was revoked before it could take hold. The bank froze the suspicious account. Investigators opened a financial exploitation case. The stolen funds, nearly all of it, were recovered and returned. Daniel and Vanessa's carefully built lie collapsed in a single afternoon of footage and paperwork. The relatives who had circled like vultures suddenly couldn't be reached. The inheritance they had schemed for slipped completely out of their hands, and Harold did something quiet and powerful. With Ruth's help, he restored the will he had secretly written years earlier, the one he told no one about. The one that remembered the person who actually stayed. The day Margaret returned to that house, the garden was overgrown and the recliner was empty in the front room because Harold was waiting by the door. When he saw her, this proud old man, he began to cry. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I should have known. I should have trusted you." Margaret crossed the room and took his hands, the same hands she'd held in 100 hospital hallways. "You're my family, Harold. I never stopped staying." She moved back in, not as the accused, as the one who was finally believed. On the months that followed, Harold's health stabilized in a way the doctors couldn't fully explain. Maybe peace heals something medicine can't reach. The relatives who had appeared only when money was on the table disappeared just as quickly when it was gone. And Margaret? She got back something far more valuable than money. Her name, her dignity, and the love of a man who finally understood what she had given. Harold often said, in his last good years, that the smartest thing he ever did was put a little camera in the corner of his living room. Because sometimes, when the whole world believes a lie, the truth just needs somewhere to wait. And in the end, the camera spoke. And it told the truth that set an honest woman free. In fifth, if this story moved you, remember Margaret. Remember that the quiet ones who stay are often the ones who deserve our trust the most.